Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ken Hardison, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have the pleasure of having Shawn Noble, Dr. Shawn Noble, of the Noble Consulting Group. And he leads a group and offers over 20 years of exploring human behavior in over 30 industries. His background in cognitive psychology, with an emphasis on judgment and decision-making, has allowed him to help several Fortune 100 companies gain a richer understanding of customer needs and apply those insights to create innovative solutions. He's a certified customer experience professional with extensive training from top schools like Stanford and Northwestern, and experience in all kinds of different areas. And today, Shawn, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
I want to talk about KPIs, but tell me a little bit more about you and what you're doing with lawyers and different things.
Yeah, sure thing, Ken. It's great seeing you, man. I want to tell you a little bit about the Noble Consulting Group. You told me a little bit of background, but since I launched about 2 years ago, I've been exclusively working with law firms. Now, I work with other agencies. That's where I cut my teeth, but I really know law firms pretty well inside and out. I kind of married into it and kind of learned the business. And since then, I've really been involved heavily. The Noble Consulting Group, I've been appointed a COO for one company and a CEO for another company. Why I maintain my presidency, because I go in and I will look at a law firm. I'll kind of break it apart. I'll ask a bunch of questions and I'll develop a strategy that is going to help them grow. And then once you lay down the strategy, you have to execute it. And oftentimes I'll get the question, can you come in and help us execute it? And that's what I've been doing the last few years.
Yeah, and for the viewers out there or listeners that don't know, Shawn actually was married to my former law partner, Beth Leon, and his mother-in-law, Cheryl. I always said was my secret weapon. I probably would not be where I am today if it weren't for Cheryl, and I've always given her credit for it, because when I started my law firm and was going to try to market and set up systems and everything, I didn't have a clue. And she really saved my butt and really helped me grow that law firm more than anybody else in the world. There's no doubt I couldn't have done it without her. And I've always been indebted to her for it, and I've always tried to give her credit for it. So you're around some really smart people, and you're already smart with all those degrees you got.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but you got the experience. So, it was funny. I had a lawyer emailed me last week, said, what should be my top 5 KPIs? So what, for the listeners out there don't know, what is a KPI, Shawn?
Hey, that's a great question, Ken. And surprisingly, these things have been around for a long, long time. So a KPI is simply a key performance indicator, and it's a measure of organizational health. How's my law firm doing? Now, some say, hey, these have been around since the Stone Ages, where, people used to draw on the walls and say, hey, our target are these animals, and here's how many animals we've gotten. I'll give you a quick history on them, though. Really, the true KPIs, from what they say, came around 1950s. And it was really through organization or management techniques, and management by objectives is really what it was. And these were high level kind of financial objectives that you'd say we want to achieve. Right. And that stayed very well for the US and for a lot of industry until we started to get in trouble, and especially the car industry got into trouble. And they realized that things like lean manufacturing and other things can drive a business. And there's other things than just your basic financial measures that matter. And that's where came out with this idea of a balanced scorecard. And a balanced scorecard really looks beyond just financial measures. It looks in terms of how is an organization doing on a whole, and what is that health. So there's other cultural factors and employee behavioral factors that really matter. Flash forward to current days, it's really taken off in terms of KPIs because of technology, and you can really see what drives things. So no longer do you have to say, I want to increase my revenue and that's my KPI. You can say specifically, I want to increase my revenue and here's the measures I want to use. And you can track that with the technology that's in place today.
Okay. So, a lot of the PILMA members do use KPIs, but what I found going around the country back when I used to do consulting, I don't do it anymore, but was the most firms don't even use them. I mean, and there are some that use them. I think the ones that most of the PILMA members do, because we teach it, how important it is. If you don't know, I always say, if you don't know your numbers, you've got to know your numbers. And it's like you said, now with so much technology, all these CRMs and all these case management systems have reports that you can run. I mean, real live reports. It wasn't like it was when I started 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, now it's like instantaneous. You know anybody, anything you want to, if you're putting in the right numbers, of course. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, so as I'm here talking about KPIs, I think people could easily tune out and say, yeah, I've got KPIs in place, but they probably don't have the right KPIs and they're probably not using them correctly because they do have more information than they ever had. I mean, the first thing in terms of understanding the whole pitch here is that KPIs are absolutely central to generating profitability into a law firm. And you've got to understand that. Once you understand that, you also have to understand that these expensive case management systems you have are wonderful, but it's not what your KPIs are. It's a little bit more to it because KPIs have to, number one, be tied to your strategy. What is your specific strategy and what is your value proposition that you're going to have that's going to differentiate you in the marketplace to make you, stand out from your competition so that people want to hire you? So, you look, and I look in terms of some of the errors that law firms are making when I look in, they won't have them tied to the objectives, or they're just using some basic objectives as their KPIs. Hey, let's make more money and let's get more customers, but they don't go deeper, and they need to go deeper. They also need to tie these KPIs to individual groups. Your paralegals don't necessarily need the same KPIs that your attorneys do. It needs to be a different mix, and you need to figure out what drives each one. Also, the practical advice is, they need to be SMART. And by SMART, this is an acronym, and I'm sure most people have heard it, but it means that you need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, they need to be relevant to the business. There needs to be a time-based component. And then I spell my SMART with an extra T because they need to be transparent. All right. And the other thing I like that a lot of firms don't do is I like to put a little bit of incentive out there. So it's a small incentive. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think people start to care a little bit more if there's a reason why they need to achieve it. And then finally, one other thing that people miss up on is they'll get the KPIs, they'll lay them out, but they don't have anybody who cracks the whip. You've got to have somebody who governs these. And if people are not being held accountable, you got to hold them accountable. You got to figure out why they're not hitting their KPIs and where they are.
Don't you, I was reading something anyway, at PILMA, each person has a KPI that they're responsible for. It might not be their job, but they're the ones held accountable, because if everyone's accountable, no one's accountable. And if no one's accountable, no one's accountable. But we found that, and it's the key things. They change at PILMA because we might be working in we might have a big project, like we're trying to get this summit going. We've got goals in that. And so we're looking at that. We got Internet Boot Camp next week. We look at things real simple, like what's the open rate on our emails, how many visits did we have to our website for this event? What's our percentage of people going to the checkout but not finishing up? I mean, we look at little things like that, and I know that's getting nitpicky, and I know most lawyers, they think about the big ones like, how much money how many cases do we open? And they do look at percentage of conversions. I always say I want to look at the percentage of conversions of cases you actually want, not how many people called you, but how should KPIs be used in law firms then?
Yeah, that is a really wonderful question, because I think about, the strategic approach to it, and you should have that strategy for each thing. And when it comes to strategy, I think about almost like you're in terms of mountain climbing, right? Like, I know you got high achievers in PILMA, and they don't just want to climb hills, they want to climb mountains. If you're going to do that, first thing, you're probably going to go out and you're going to learn everything about mountain climbing that you can. And you're going to go to Google Earth, and you're going to look at, let's say you're going to conquer Mount Everest, and you're going to look that up, and you're going to look up the routes, you're going to read books, you're going to join groups to learn all about it. But primarily what you're going to do is you're going to hire yourself a Sherpa, right? You're going to hire somebody who knows how to climb and who has been there and who has done that and can give you the experience. I think that's one of the keys to success for law firms, is figuring out somebody who has laid this out and walked that road before. So I just want to make sure that that's understood. But, first and foremost, for anything, I like to keep it really simple and use the law of parsimony and say there's really 5 steps in terms of coming up with some great KPIs. Number one, I've talked about it before, you got to start with that strategy. You got to know that value that you're trying to drive for the organization. And I'll give you a clear example in just a little bit.
Okay.
Then you need to come up with some business questions. Second is you need to come up with business questions. These are called key performance questions that answer questions about that strategy, things that you may want to know. Third, you want to see, do you have data in the organization that can help you answer those questions? Because if you can't even answer them because you don't have the data, or you just have to make up stuff, they're not usually good KPIs if you can't answer the question. It might seem like a great question, but if you don't have data or information to help you, it's no good. And then if we look in terms of some other things, you're going to come up with that SMART process. How frequent should you measure it? What is that right level? And then finally, you have to align this with the organization. If you sit in an organization, Ken, you want to know why a KPI is important, why this matters to my performance, and everybody should know, and everybody should buy in, and should drive all the way up to strategy. And if it doesn't, people get lost and they won't care.
Okay.
So let me give you some specific example, because I gave you some, really general, but, let's say I'm got my law firm going, and I've got a law firm called, I don't know, we'll call it the Noble Law Firm, just for ease. And I want my value proposition to really be set around the customer experience. That's important to me. That's how I'm going to differentiate. I know that in my firm, that if somebody comes in, they will be taken care of every step of the way. In fact, my value proposition is going to be, we are there every step of the way. So everything that I do for my KPI should help to layer and help to drive that value proposition. Okay. So for that, I go to step 2, because I've established my value proposition. And I say, okay, what are some key questions for the performance? Okay, if I'm there every step of the way, okay, how do I make that believable? So how often does someone need to be contacted to feel supported? That could be question 1. Question 2, all right, who needs to contact that audience or the client to make them feel supported? There's different levels that matter. And then third, what specific actions do we have to do to make people feel like they were supported? So now I've got a structure, I've got some questions that help me understand how I'm going to push that value. Third thing we need to do is we need to come up with an answer for those questions. Okay. So first thing I said, how often does somebody need to be contacted? Well, we know that there's certain guidelines and there's feedback that we get from clients that I believe that over contact is better than under contact. And I also believe that depending on where people are, if I'm running a personal injury firm, that's my example here, I know that during times of treatment, things are a little bit more sketchy for them. It's not as clear, and there's going to need to be more handholding. So I'm going to contact every 15 days. And then I'm also, once they're done treating, I'm going to make sure I contact every 30 days. And I'm going to record this. I've got a case management system. I'm going to use it for that. And I'm going to track how often and what that contact was like. So that's would be one KPI at a high level. Second, who needs a contact? I'm smart enough to know from listening to my clients that not all contact matters. Some attorneys have trouble hopping on the phone and doing that, but it means the world to that client. It creates so much stickiness if you do. So I'm going to put a metric that, the attorneys have to reach out every 30 days and talk to those clients. And then third, in terms of specific actions, well, what do we know? We know that speed really matters when it comes to clients getting their claims settled fast and getting their cases done. So, how quickly can we get the medical bills back? How quickly do we follow up on liens? How quick do we get demands out? Are we negotiating fast? So any of these speed metrics, they start to, really churn on my brain and say, these are pretty good KPIs that we could use to drive the business and really help to show that we are definitely an organization who values our customers.
Yeah, you're talking my language. We used to do all that, and I know
Yep.
if you've ever talked to Cheryl, that we actually had the attorneys, if they didn't, we measured it, and if they didn't meet it each quarter, at least over 90% contact, full 100 every 30 days, they didn't get their quarterly bonus.
That's right. That's right.
And we actually had one lawyer didn't do it one time. He didn't get it. He was very upset, but he said, I was at 88. He said, that's so close. I said, you got to have a cutting off point somewhere. I said, you knew what it was to start with. I mean, it won't like it. I sprung it on you and went from 85 to 90 overnight. I mean, it's been this way for 3 years. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, so that was going to be my other deal. I mean, and I guess that's the fourth thing is measurement.
Yeah.
And I guess I just kind of answered my question in one way, but then overall, I guess you can measure these little things that you're doing, like the calls and having benchmarks, which we used to do too. After a person's been released, you got 45 days to get the medicals in, get the then you got 90 days either sell it or go to a lawsuit. But how about the overall experience? Like, what would you suggest? I mean, surveys or the what do you call it? NEPS or so? I can't. There's something there.
Yep.
Would you refer your family or friends?
Absolutely. Yep. Net Promoter Score, which is NPS, is a great metric because that is an actionable metric, right? You're asking the customer, how likely are you to recommend us based off of the experience that you just had? And a lot of law firms live by referral, right? And if they are not getting referral, they're dying. And so NPS is a great measure. And you can also come back because ultimately the client is king. You can get crazy on the operational metrics. And I would say, please don't do that. Please don't go down to the everything that we could possibly measure because it has to make a difference. It has to make a difference in differentiating you in terms of your strategy, right? And so if hey, why do we want to be a very customer or client-centric organization? Because we know we're going to drive a lot more recommendation. Let's see if that's happening. Let's do that NPS measure, and let's go out there and make sure that we're getting that payoff. And that's how the system should work. And there's enough data models you can run, regression models and so forth, that will show you, okay, is our work paying off? And do these value drivers really make a difference? You weren't able to do that 20 years ago. You weren't able to do that very well, even maybe 10 years ago, but now you can. And everybody is doing it in terms of showing this drives success.
Yeah, I remember the first Lexus, first really nice car I bought. This been years ago. It was up in Raleigh. And the salesman called me like 2 days later. He said, "You're going to be getting something, it's going to ask you to rank like from 1 to 10. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know it was a net promoter score.
Yep.
And he said, "I really need a 9 or 10, buddy." He said, "If there's any reason you can't give me a 9 or 10, let me know." And that was my introduction.
Yeah. I mean, they've made it so that it's like, we are going to starve if you don't give us a 9 or 10. In fact, I'm going to lose my job and lose my wife and everything. And that's a danger of paying on some of the incentives. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but I'll talk about it now. It's something called a perverse incentive, and it's got a technical name. I didn't come up with that, but perverse incentive. And where they link this back to, one of the more great stories around this is the British Empire. They had started finding out in India, there were a lot of cobra attacks. Okay. Poisonous cobras killing a lot of people. And so they basically put a bounty out and said, for every cobra skin you bring us, we will give you X amount of dollars. So they started getting in lots and lots of cobra skins, and they're like, oh, look at the success. But they didn't realize that people now were starting to raise cobras so they could like get their skin. And once they got those cobras and they said, okay, well, we're not going to pay for this anymore, they released them out into the wild. And then they, they increased the cobra population and even more when the program started. So you have to be careful about the things that you incentivize.
Yeah.
Now I will go back to, I think it is good to incentivize on some of the things. And I call it a token incentive. And what I mean by that, Ken, is, hey, you're a case manager. I'm going to give you 5 criteria. I want you to do something like, follow-up calls, demands out, client satisfaction ratings, some things that matter. I'm going to give you $25 to $50 for each time you hit it. So it does a couple things. One, it gives them to give a damn about the incentive. Second, they start to track themselves. They're well aware of their performance, so they're asking to be tracked and to be measured because they're getting some money, and it's not that much money. And the third thing is it creates a competitive environment. They know how they're doing compared to their colleagues, and they want to do better. And anytime you work in a competitive environment and it's best for the customer, it's a good win.
That's cool, man. So how do you, we talk about measuring, and then the last thing is align and assign KPIs for the organization.
Yeah.
How do you, so can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, from working in large industries like I worked for John Deere, I worked for BASF, I worked for Lenovo. With corporate communication, there's a belief of the communication for 7 times before something sticks. So the idea that, you have to over communicate, really, really sticks in my mind. And that's really where things start in terms of the alignment. One, people have to understand the what and the why. So it's not as easy as just rolling things out and saying, hey, this stuff's going to be on a dashboard somewhere, and I need you to make these customer calls. They got to know why they're making the calls and why it matters. You gave me the example of the attorney that missed, that got 88%. Well, that's great, unless he's got 100 or 200 clients. That's either 12 or 24 people that didn't get contacted. That starts to add up if it runs across the organization. Those numbers become real because those are clients, and those are clients who are likely to give you a negative survey, go out and say something bad about you on social media. So you got to do that. The other thing, I'd highly recommend a gatekeeper. So somebody who plays that bad cop and the good cop as well. They'll give out the praises. They'll run contests. I like to run a KPI contest to see who can, get the most, KPIs and really make it some fun contests in terms of chores that are, or tasks that are hard. But when things don't get done, you got to have somebody there willing to have that talk. You also have somebody who has to help produce the reports and also make sure that people know exactly what's going on the whole time, and have the weekly or monthly meeting to show that governance of the KPI.
Yeah. You know, I know a lawyer, ran a Social Security practice. It's been many years ago. And one thing he would do is people would run contests, and like he ran a contest to see how many uh, new applications somebody could do in a day, right? In an 8-hour day. And I said, well, what did it come out? We said, well, I had two that were pretty low, and then I had two that were really like astronomically fast. Then I had the other 6 or 7 that were right there in the middle. He said, and I took the top of the middle, and that was my benchmark, and that's what we used to, go by. He said, because nobody could have kept up with those other 2 ladies. They were seasoned, and they were A players. And I thought that was was what you were talking about. I thought that was a pretty cool way to figure out, because I have lawyers ask me, how many cases should a paralegal handle? How many notes should they be in the. It depends,
Yes.
on what kind of case, if it's a litigation paralegal, they're not going to handle as many files. I mean, it's just more work. You're not going to see as many notes because there's going to be more just work typing and stuff, creating discovery and things like that. But yeah, so let me ask you this. This is the question, like I got it last week. I mean, and I know what you're going to say is it depends, but you say you've been doing this a couple of years, 2 or 3 years now, far just with law firms, just solely with law firms.
Yeah.
What are you seeing like the top 5? I'm not saying every firm's different, and I know that, but what are like top 3 or 5 that you say pretty much every firm probably should be doing?
Yeah. So one thing I would absolutely say is don't go out and just Google it and grab 3 or 6. It will depend, but I can tell you those that are pretty stellar. You have to have something that's client communication based, right? It has to be routine. I don't care what timeline you set, but there has to be a timeline, and you got to be contacting your clients without a doubt. If you don't do it, ugly things are going to happen, and things are going to blow up this day and age. So put in a KPI around your client contact. I like, and I'm talking personal injury, every works, but you have to have some work product get out, right? So a demand out, something has to get out the door, and you have to put a timeline on doing that very quickly. So, I look in terms of when are you released from medical treatment? How quickly can you get that demand out the door? Right. And to me, that is very imperative, in terms of success. And then I think letting the client be king and getting a client satisfaction rating. I prefer the Net Promoter Score, NPS, being that KPI, because I think that really matters the most. Letting them be the ultimate, judge and jury, if you will.
I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah. So what do you think about, when you say KPI, how about far as your return on investment? Do you look at things like that, or is that just more like financials, would you say?
I think that nowadays it is really easy to drive that outcome, right, Ken? So to say, I want 20% growth in my organization, and this is ultimately a growth podcast. You have to take a few steps back and say, what is going to drive that? So just throwing it out there and that being your main KPI, being something about 20% growth, something is not a very good KPI. It's important. It's important to know what you want out there, but it's not enough, because that is what you call a lagging indicator. It's already happened. It's already in the past. You need leading indicators to really tell you how you're going to get that road. And basically, to me, that becomes, you have to go inside a firm. You have to figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they're going to have that competitive advantage to get there before you can really set those KPIs.
Yeah. I mean, it's like lawyers they still ask me this, what percentage of my budget should I use for marketing? And I say, well, you're asking the wrong question. I mean, my question to you is, if you know your numbers, how many more cases do you want?
That's right.
And what type of cases do you want? And we just spend that much more. If it costs you $1,000 a piece to get a case off the internet, a car wreck case, then you've got to spend $10,000 than you spent this year. You know, and you might, there's some adjustments, but the deal is just saying I'm going to spend 15% because that seems to be the rule. I can tell you in our old firm, I had years I spent 12%. I had years I spent 30%.
Yep.
It just depended on where what kind of growth mode we were in.
That's right. And then you have to look at your internal infrastructure too, Ken, because if you're
Yeah.
bringing in that many cases and you can't run them, you're going to stub your toe, and people are going to get all over social media and say what a horrible firm you are because you don't run their cases. You don't give them enough client service. So you got to have that balance.
Yeah. And that's, we were talking about Cheryl, that she's the one that saved me on that, because I went from taking in 20 cases a month to about 120.
Whew.
Went on TV, and I could not handle it, man. I did not have the infrastructure. I didn't have the systems or processes. And we had to shut it down, and we had to get in there and get organized, because it really, it's like my mama used to tell me, be careful what you wish for, right?
That's right.
I mean, it's not that easy now, but back then it was that easy. I say it's a lot harder now to jump on TV and grab a market share. But back then, you didn't even have to have a great commercial. I mean, you just had to be, because they weren't that many doing it. You didn't have a lot of competition, because everybody looked down on it.
I mean, Ken, as I look, the competitive advantage doesn't seem to be at that upfront in terms of attracting people. It's hard. It's hard to attract people and say you're different, but really where I see the difference is in terms of providing a great customer experience.
That's what we went on. I mean, you remember, if you talked to Cheryl, I mean, we said, always putting you first. We had a client advocate hotline. We had a client bill of rights. The lawyer had to call them every 30 or 45 days. The paralegal or the case manager every 15 to 30 days.
Yep.
And, we copied them on everything. I mean, and listen, we had a great referral business. I mean, even though we were spending 7 figures on marketing, we still 43% of our cases came from referrals, which is, most lawyers say, well, that's not that high. It is high when you're spending $2 million on TV and other advertising. It is high.
It's amazingly high, Ken, to have almost half your business coming from referrals. Yeah, when you're basically running an acquisition machine, I mean, new acquisition machine. Yeah.
So that's what we went after. I mean, when everything we did, I mean, that's what we pushed in the surveys and all that stuff. We never did use a Net Promoter Score, though. We used to use regular surveys and did a lot of other little things, but
NPS has blown up big, and I've implemented NPS systems for multiple large firms, and the thing with NPS is it works two ways. One is the score, and I'll tell you, the score does not matter, right? You basically get it, but what matters is you've got to act quickly when you get a bad review. So it's really a promotion measure from 0 to 10. How'd we do? And if you get anybody who gives you a 0 through 6, these are called detractors. They will go up and blow up the internet. You need to get on the phone, and you need to have your client advocate call them and say, what'd we do? Where'd we screw up? How can we make your life better? And really be apologetic for the situation. And if you can do that and really, try to be empathetic to those clients, it'll make a big difference. And that's why NPS, I think, is so valuable. People in a satisfaction survey generally don't ding you that low. But if you're asking them to go out and put their butt on the line and make a recommendation, hey, that's a different thing. That's my reputation you're asking me to put on my line, on the line.
What do you think? And we're getting close to the end, but I've never talked on the podcast about Net Promoter Score, and I know I think it has got something to do with KPIs, which does. But have you ever used, or what do you think about the employee Net Promoter Score, where it says, how likely would you be to recommend one of your friends come work with our company or our law firm? What do you think about those?
I'm not as big a fan of those because people have reasons why, especially in smaller law firms. There's a whole cultural dynamic that they're like, I don't think I want my friend in here knowing my life and my gossip. So it gets a little messy. I prefer the employee engagement measure, and that is how engage your employees in terms of, hey, are they willing to work a little extra for the client? Are they willing to feel like they make a difference? Do they have a voice in the organization? So I like that more than the employee NPS. I mean, employee NPS, I wouldn't say it's bad, but I just think that there's better measures.
I think it probably works better with big corporations where everybody don't know everybody.
That's exactly right.
Most law firms are not. Most consumer-based law firms are, about the biggest one I know of is maybe, other than John Morgan, is like, 300 or 400, 500 people, but in one office, a couple hundred, mostly is what you see. I mean, really most of them are less than 30 people.
That's right. And that's like a family. That's like a family when you're like that.
Yeah. Anything else that we didn't cover about KPIs that you think is important to our listeners and viewers?
I think that we hit the things that we need to. Just one of the biggest things I'll reiterate is make sure that they're modernized. You probably have things that would hit the critical standard for a KPI, but if they're not tied up to a strategy, and you don't have some of the technology in place to measure those and give you a great feedback at that point, you're probably not doing it right. So just keep that in mind.
Well, listen, if somebody wants to get up with you or wants to follow up and ask more questions, how can they do that, Shawn?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. One is just email me at Shawn@thenobleconsultinggroup.com.
And how you spell Shawn?
Yep, SHAWN.
Okay, just want to make sure.
You got it. And then the other is you can always just send me a text at 919-592-8401.
All right. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure having you on here. I heard a lot of good things about you from Cheryl, and I don't think I've ever actually met you, but she was telling the truth, your stuff. So,
hey, I appreciate the time, Ken. It's been great talking to you.
Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.